Hi to everyone. Thank you for coming to the second day of Web3 Tales. My name is Dejan Radic. I'm CTO at two companies, Coding Llama and Dexstar. And today I'm going to talk about a tale of two worlds, real world and on-chain world. So first we are going to cover the differences between these two worlds and actually the communication between them, the identity as a common ground towards solving certain regulatory moments, tokenization as kind of modeling structure, which would enable us to bring the values from the real world to on-chain world, the secrecy, which is important, and of course, DeFi or decentralized finance as innovation that covers all the things previously mentioned. So, as the introduction has said, actually, we are talking about two worlds. Those two worlds are kind of different, and there are different ways of viewing them. First one is actually the way how things are executed in the real world. And we can say that the real world is actually async or asynchronous, while on-chain world is actually synchronous, because the events that are happening on-chain world are following the blocks, which usually have the time distance between them that make the things going smoothly and synchronously. The real world also has the material side of it. And that material side is actually viewed through tangible assets, which we can see, which we can touch, while the on-chain world deals with digital assets, which are actually kind of different. We can have the real world representations in on-chain world, but on-chain is still about digital assets and about the models we are going to create with it. In the real world, we have legal systems and we have legal contracts that come and that are enabling us to execute a lot of operations in the business and in the daily lives that we're having. While on the on-chain world, we are seeing the smart contracts as a means of executing things in a way that aligns with the real world in legal contracts. For the real world, we can say that it's kind of opaque. So actually, not like everything is fully transparent and visible. We see only things that we perceive, and we can see only the things that are presented to us. While on-chain world, we're talking about transparency and decentralization and the ability to see all the events that are happening on the on-chain world. So that's why we can say it's actually transparent, and it enables us to look into the history of all the events that happen on the on-chain world. Regarding predictability, actually, we do not have like cause, action, connection in all the things that are happening in the real world. While on the on-chain world, if we have, for example, some transactions that are coming, we can predict how things are going to be executed on-chain, because smart contracts are non-changeable, they are immutable, they are fixed, and we can predict the next step on-chain world is going to do, but not far in the future. Real world is run by us, by people, by individuals, and our decisions to actually execute the transactions on-chain world are based on our opinions that we have based on information we have from the real world and the environment around us. While the on-chain world is purely data-driven. Actually, we have the data that's on-chain, and we're using that data to execute the next step or to create a new state from the previous block, and so on. In the picture, we are seeing the real world or the off-chain world, and we are seeing the on-chain world. And actually, we have the assets in the real world, but what we are trying to do is actually move them towards the on-chain world as a model in a way that we are doing tokenization. So we have these two worlds, and if we have two components, two civilizations, anything that's connected, we're talking about communication. And if we are having the communication as a mechanism, we are seeing the way how those two worlds align between each other. And actually, when we think about the real world and what runs the real world, it's actually the energy. We can say similar things about the on-chain world, but not every consensus mechanism requires the mining and the energy towards it. So we cannot say that energy runs the on-chain world. We can say that transactions actually run them, because transactions are the units that are enabling us to create those smooth changes of the states in the on-chain world, while creation of those transactions also yields the events that are happening on-chain world, which we can detect and act upon in the real world. So transactions to the off-chain world, events from the off-chain world to the real world. And in order to communicate in an effective way, we are thinking about the ways how are we going to structure the data-driven on-chain world to have enough data to make its own decisions based on the rules specified by smart contracts. And in order to take that information and actually present it in the best possible way, we are using the blockchain oracles. So Oracle is a service which enables us to write the data towards the on-chain world and to have enough data in the on-chain world to actually execute all the things that we are expecting to be executed. But since those services are kind of centralized, we're thinking about veracity or trustworthiness of those sources. And actually, in this context, we're also thinking about the centralized way of actually handling those services. And we have innovations in that way, but that's kind of a bottleneck we are still handling as an industry to be able to have a smooth execution of all smart contracts. The next thing, what is important and is becoming increasingly important lately because of regulatory requirements and compliance in general, is identity. Actually, we're having the ability for anyone to come generate its own private key address and become an anonymous player on the on-chain world, while we're actually enabling them to do any kinds of transactions and any kinds of interactions within the on-chain world without the identity. So what do we need regarding solutions in this context? We need KYC. We need know your customer. We need somebody who is going to be a registry provider, either some company, institution, state, which is actually going to have issued identity to all of us, and we are going to present ourselves within that identity. And if we don't do it, we can say that we have this pseudonymity or pseudo-anonymity execution on the on-chain world, which is actually hiding our identity in a larger sense. So we have one segment that is pseudonymous. We have the other segment that's fully regulated past KYC identity issued by the state. We have effectively made ourselves, we came to the point of actually splitting the on-chain world into two parts. One is fully regulated and one is totally unregulated. And majority of chains right now are trying to be as compliant as possible, and we are trying to be more identity-driven, but I think it's going to take a longer time to actually erase the pseudonymity and like the ability for everyone to participate in the network without actually exposing their identity. The next concept we're going to cover regarding these two worlds is actually the way to present the real-world assets towards the on-chain world. So when we think about tokenization or the tokens, we're talking about the models, how we see things from the real world on the on-chain world. And what is model? Model is actually a representation that contains all the important characteristics of the thing we're trying to present. And in the capitalist world, what's the most important thing to present? It's actually the ownership of the assets. So tokens have enabled us to present the ownership of the real-world assets on-chain with all the important characteristics of the assets we are trying to present. That means it has some kind of name, it has some kind of image, it has some kind of state representation. So we are taking the important characteristics and we're placing them on chain, and that is enabling us to execute the transactions and use those states or characteristics in the best possible way. Through the smart contracts, we have enabled the customization of those representations because they are all different and they all have different means of functioning. And actually, smart contracts have enabled us to present those things in different ways and to present them in a way that's fully aligned with the real world. Regarding the real-world assets, we're talking about real-world asset tokenization as a mechanism of presenting those tokens. And effectively, when we talk about those tokens, what's the most known division or categorization of these tokens is actually on a fungibility level. So we have fungible and non-fungible tokens or NFTs. So those are presented by using these two standards, ERC20 and ERC721. We're having the real world, and we know we can hide things in the real world. While on the other hand, we're having the on-chain world where everything is public, transparent, and decentralized. And all the information and all the executions, all the state changes can be tracked, seen, and can be utilized further on in executions and so on. So how to be secret in that world? How to protect the privacy in this world, where everything can be seen, everything can be tracked? Actually, we talked about pseudonymity, but for example, having somebody who is not behind his real identity, being a player in this network, he can effectively execute a couple of transactions, and by knowing some context, some institution or individual can actually find a way to de-anonymize him. So his identity can be seen if we have enough information about him. And actually, we are coming to the point of actually, apart from integrity, where blockchains are really strong, we're trying to solve the context of confidentiality protection. And how to protect the confidentiality is actually the only way we have is actually not to put things on chain. So if we are not putting them on chain, instead of permissionless or public networks, we can utilize these permission networks. And those permission networks are enabling us to have smaller amount of participants which are in behind and which are enabling the functionality of data in general to be hidden from majority of the public participants. And those are the blockchain types that are coming and that are becoming increasingly important. But they also bring a lot of technical challenges that we need to solve. And that has brought us to the privacy transparency trade-off. So if we want to be fully private, we're not going to present enough of characteristics that we want to present. But if we want to be fully transparent, we are going to bring us to a position that everybody knows everything. So we are still trying to find ways to balance these things out and to create a proper trade-off in this context. What we can do, for example, is we can take some data that shouldn't be public. We can do like some cryptographic primitives like encryption. We can cipher it, encrypt it, put it on chain. But we are going to come to the issue of forward secrecy. Actually, we can place the encrypted data on chain, but anybody can read that data and actually try to decipher it. If not immediately, with the, let's say, improvements in quantum computing, he can do it, let's say, in 10 years. So that would be similar like in the real world if we take something valuable, put it into the safe, and bring it to the square downtown and place it there. Everybody knows that something valuable is there. It's just a moment of time when some thief is going to take whole safe and work towards opening it. And so actually placing encrypted data on chain to protect secrecy is not a solution that's viable. It's used, but actually it has its own pitfalls. And holistically viewed, all the things we talked about from identity, tokenization, have brought us to the point of enabling the DeFi. So when we talk about finance, we're talking about money management. And money management is a concept where we are enabling no central identity to execute the operations towards managing our money. And we're enabling what's so-called on-chain money management. Actually, I like to call this a new public infrastructure. Why? Because, for example, 2,000 years ago, we had only materialistic values. We have built a network of roads for exchange of those materialistic values. By coming to the point that we have energy that's decoupled from materialistic values in terms of electrical current, we have created electrical grids for the exchange of energy. At some point, we saw that energy as signal, and we enabled the creation of telecommunication networks as the public infrastructure for the exchange of information. And we have today's internet. And now, on top of internet, we're creating the public infrastructure for the exchange of digital assets. And those digital assets, of course, in capitalist world, are firstly going to be financial instruments, stocks, bonds, financial derivatives, and so on. And by putting all the tokens on chain, we're enabling the composability, which brings us to the position of knowing all the synthetic assets. And if we had like these kinds of solutions fully utilized in 2008, actually the world financial crisis wouldn't happen, because we would see that the base assets were not A+ credit score, because actually they were really badly scored. So what we are enabling with this is actual full transparency. To conclude today's talk, we have talked about actually two worlds, real world and on-chain world. They have their own characteristics, they have their own means of functioning, they have their own communication protocols through transactions, through events, through blocks, through synchronous and async communication and execution. On the other hand, we have the need towards identity that comes from the real world, and those identity requirements are splitting the on-chain world into two islands. One is fully regulated, one is totally unregulated. The transaction block token construct is enabling us to tokenize real-world assets, But as internet, the blockchain as a concept has not been created with the privacy by design means. And that has brought us to think about secrecy more widely. And at the end, what we are trying to do is actually to create public infrastructure without central entities for exchange of digital assets and to enable the decentralized finance. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dejan. Unfortunately, time is up, so I will just ask you one quick question. Which blockchain network, including L2 or platform, is most suitable for financial instruments tokenization for hybrid model, in your opinion?
Well, in general, I see L2s as the next step, and they are definitely going to be utilized. But for larger transactions, it would be best to use L1s. So there is no one-fits-all solution. If we go towards L2, L3, and so on, we go towards less security. If we go towards L0, L1, we go towards more security, but that comes with a price. So generally, all the innovations we are having nowadays are going to stay, but it depends on how much they are going to be utilized and how much people are going to be brought to our industry.
Thank you so much, Dan.